the public based on the taxpayer. Right.
Right.
So we should just
don't we want a public that's educated, like about, you know, the scourge of racism and slavery and Jim Crow?
Educated to what end? The purpose of public education is to benefit the American taxpayer by having people who are skilled,
who are educated,
intellectually curious or whatever, and to become a better citizen.
Yeah.
But there's also like an economic benefit to this. So
you don't think that public universities, there should be like intellectual freedom at public universities?
Okay, I mean, if
Harvard is also not a public university.
But under that argument, yeah, I agree with you, and that's what I'm trying to say, though, is that at a state level, like if the state of Massachusetts, if they had a literal white power curriculum, do you think that that would be acceptable? I would say absolutely not. The state of Massachusetts, at the University of Massachusetts, if those taxpayers voted to say that that's not in line with what we want to teach our schools, be my guest. It's your university. You guys are the ones who fund it.
And so you think that teaching about, you know, the scourge of slavery and let's say our, you know, genocide against Native Americans is equivalent to a white power seminar?
Well, I think that if you're going to teach it in such a way like the 1619 Project did, which was also funded and then used at some of these elite universities to say America is irrevocably racist, then what are we all doing here? I mean, there's no point, you know, to this entire thing. So this is the problem, is you think one is justifiable and not. I'm making a point about academic freedom, which is genuinely value neutral. So if the taxpayer and the public broadly mostly agrees with me about critical race theory and DEI, then yes, they should be able to influence and say those universities should not be allowed to do this with our dollars.
You know, that's actually not even true, though, that the taxpayer in the country agrees with you about DEI. But I think we can all recognize that there are some intellectual inquiries that are worthy of debate, you know, to take it out of race, like some intellectual inquiries that are worthy of debate and some which are only add confusion to the debate. So, for example, it wouldn't be like, you know, worthy of academic freedom to have some flat earther there trying to make their case, et cetera. But to have people who, you know, see race as a central component of our nation's history and, you know, teach courses on that, teach courses on, you know, gender studies has been a big target. I would say that understanding the dynamics of our genders and our differences has perhaps never been more important. There's a lot that we could learn from there. I think that that is completely within the bounds.
Fine, then go to Harvard or to a private university.
Taught at a school, and certainly represents the sort of academic freedom that the right, you know, really like obsessed over during during the Biden administration and previously. So you know, to enforce this sort of conformity and like you have to learn quote unquote patriotic history that doesn't ever cast the America in a negative light. I mean, that's what they're going for here. And they're using anti-Semitism as a cudgel in order to help bring these universities to heel so that they're only teaching the versions of American history that are approved by this particular government.
If you want to put your kid into some Howard Zinn university, that's your right. You know, you can go to some private university. But if public-funded universities by the taxpayer obviously have a right, not only in the say on the curriculum, but into be paying for and to propping up said departments, which are genuinely 100% funded by them and not some major endowment. I genuinely couldn't disagree more. I mean,
so I don't really understand then your opposition to what they're doing with anti-Semitism
because we're doing it on behalf of a foreign country.
What they would say is that this is our foreign policy. This is the argument Marco Rubio and others make. This is our national security. This is our foreign policy. We want our tax dollars to go to further our national interest as American citizens. And part of our interest is in combating anti-Semitism and bolstering our ally Israel in the Middle East. So what's your issue with what they're doing?
No, that's my point, is that I completely disagree with that. But I'm saying, I mean, do you really believe in a principle where the taxpayer has no say on the academic input or the academic environment that they're going to fund? That's ridiculous.
I believe that we should have academic freedom and intellectual exploration.
Okay, and so you would be okay with a white power classroom at the University of Virginia?
I already explained that there are certain things that do not add to the academic or intellectual atmosphere.
Who's setting the standard? The democracy.
Society does.
Yes, that's right, exactly.
And society
and we can have elections, and we can have inputs.
Saagar, society thinks it's important. They don't agree with you on DEI. By the way, they don't even agree with me on DEI. Society is in favor of knowing the facts about our history, even the ugly facts about our history. And I think it's incredibly important that we be able to learn. And you're a history guy.
Yes, that's
right. You know more about this stuff than I do, Saagar.
But that's my point.
And it was important for your own intellectual development to know the truth about those past horrors, whether it's Jim Crow or whether it's slavery or whether it was what was done to Native American people on these lands. That's not to say like, oh, you have to live with that shame and guilt. Where this is, what the right always says. But yeah, you want to learn from the past. You want to learn from the mistakes so we don't repeat them again in the future. And that's what's under assault here with this onslaught against universities. They want to bring them to heel so that only the quote unquote, the sanitized quote unquote patriotic version of history that is not honest about the warts and the truth of, things that our country has been involved in.
I would need to see curriculum for which you're describing that as, because I think
Go look at what Prager is putting out. Go look at the curriculum they put into Florida.
That's not a real university. That's
no, but Saagar, they used that for curriculums in places like Florida as part of this patriotic education push. This is the broader project.
Okay,
and so if you don't see the way that this anti-Semitism thing is being used as a cudgel to enforce a broader bringing to heel of these universities, like that is just one plank of the plan here. That is the tip of the spear. But the broader plan is to completely bring these universities to heel and make them comply with whatever sanitized history that this particular administration finds to be useful.
My point is that your quote, quote, sanitized history, the other, quote, true history is one where we just sit there and we're supposed to be like, oh, and these are all the most horrible things about America. My education in Texas was terrible. And it wasn't because it was woke. It was genuinely just not actual. It had 1-inch depth of which 99% of the US population will ever actually read below. The vast majority of what I've learned has been reading on myself. And what I have learned is that there is deep complexity to the issue. And that with Jim Crow and with the slavery and the South and the debates at the US Constitutional Convention during the Civil War and more were not often all pure and heroic in the way that we like to learn, or all that evil, is that there was a deep amount of gray area in that time. And that actually the story of how we were able to emerge today to a much more equal society, not yet of where we are, is remarkable and is one in which we should absolutely study, and I think we should celebrate. Now, I think critical race theory, what it does is invert that on its head and to say, no, actually where we are today is an immense failure and we didn't get there. And this so-called true history or whatever is just like leftist claptrap, to be honest. Like, it's not one which genuinely grapples with any of the good of the U.S. has done, because like I referenced with Howard Zinn and more, it views it as this evil empire, morally corrupt at its founding, as the 1619 Project does. And what that instills in people and or the citizen is this idea that we can never get better instead of looking at both equally. This is my issue with critical race theory.
I'm familiar with your opinion.
Yeah.
However, the question is, do you think that learning about those things should be effectively banned by the state?
Effectively banned. Well, we're not teaching slavery in school.
The goal.
Like, come on.
That is the goal, is to enforce conformity on these universities and to push a sanitized narrative. So that, I just think that, listen, you can agree or disagree with how central race is and the way that this affected our nation's development. I mean, I would say that it's been a pretty important part of many of the most critical battles in terms of, how we've gotten to where we are today, and important to learn about and see the legacy of, et cetera. But like, I believe you've previously spoken on behalf of academic freedom, and to think that that's out of bounds, or that the state should use its power to bully universities out of teaching that sort of, history is, I think, pretty wild.
I want to be clear here. I'm talking specifically about public education. I think we can all agree curriculum is propaganda in some form, yes or no? Now, in that propaganda, we all democratically get to decide in that public education for what should be and should be not taught in our classrooms. This is ultimately a parental decision. In fact, I think that what you're laying out is a ridiculous idea where the taxpayer is supposed to give you unlimited or whatever amount of funds, and you're able to just be able to do whatever you want and preach that to children and or create curriculum for students. We cannot live in a society
first of all, we're talking
and have never lived in a society
specifically about universities.
Okay, sure.
Number one.
Yes. But these are publicly funded. Every time I look at my property tax bill, I'm pretty sure I know where a lot of it's going.
And we're predominantly talking about, I mean, this just gets to I think, a fundamental difference about what the university system is even for. Because in my opinion, the university system is not, including the public university system, is all about